his closest ally, would become his greatest enemy. On the Mongolian steppe, there was no lonelier condition than being without a tribe. No protection, no identity, no place in the order of things. A man without a clan was barely a man at all. He was a ghost, invisible to the world that mattered. Temüjin had lived that reality. He knew its weight better than almost anyone, which is why, when he found someone willing to stand beside him, it meant everything. His name was Jamuka, and their bond began in childhood. Two boys on the same merciless steppe, drawn together by something that transcended tribal politics. They played together. They competed together. Twice, at different points in their youth, they performed the ritual of Anda, sworn brotherhood, a bond the Mongols considered sacred, deeper than friendship, deeper in some ways than blood. They exchanged gifts in the way the ritual demanded. They pledged their fates to each other. For a time, they were inseparable. They camped together, ate together, strategized together. People who knew them in those early years must have assumed they would rise together, two sides of the same force, complementary and united. But the steppe had a way of making brothers into rivals. As Temüjin's reputation began to grow, as warriors started looking to him, attaching themselves to his name, the differences between the two men became impossible to ignore. Jamuka was a traditionalist. He believed in the hierarchy that the steppe had always known, that noble blood determined leadership, that the old order existed for good reasons, and that men should rise or fall according to the station they were born into. Temüjin looked at that system and saw it for what it had done to him. It had allowed a clan to abandon a chief's widow and her children. It had let bloodline trump ability, loyalty, and merit. It was a system designed to protect those already at the top. He wanted no part of it. Any man who proved himself loyal and capable could rise under Temüjin's banner. Any man who betrayed him, regardless of his lineage, would fall. It was a simple philosophy. And on the steppe, where capable men had spent their whole lives being told their blood wasn't good enough, it was electrifying. Two brothers, two visions, and not enough room on the steppe for both of them. But before the rivalry fully erupted, something happened that changed everything. Temüjin married Berte. The match had been arranged by his father years before his death, a union designed to forge an alliance with the Ongirat tribe. But from everything the historical record suggests, this was not a cold political arrangement for Temüjin. Berte was his partner in the truest sense, intelligent, steady, and perceptive in ways that complemented his own nature. In a life defined by betrayal and instability, she was something rare, someone he could trust completely. And then she was taken from him. The Merkits, a tribe with an old grievance against Temüjin's family, descended on their camp in a raid and seized Berte. It was calculated humiliation, a message to the rising young leader that he was still vulnerable, still reachable, still powerless. What Temüjin did next was the first real demonstration of the leader he was becoming. Rather than riding out in a rage with whatever men he had, which would have been suicidal, he was strategic. He reached out to two of the most powerful men he knew, Togrul, the Khan of the Karaites, who had been an ally of his father, and Jamuka, still his sworn brother at this point. He negotiated, he persuaded, he assembled a force large enough to actually succeed. And then he rode out, hit the Merkit camp with overwhelming speed and coordination, and brought Berta home. It was more than a rescue. It was a proof of concept. Temüjin could build alliances where none existed. He could lead men who had no obligation to follow him. He could plan, execute, and win. Word spread across the steppe, and the men who heard it began to ask themselves a question that would change history. What if I rode for him? What followed over the next years was one of the most remarkable feats of political and military organization the medieval world had ever seen. Temüjin built his army the way he built everything, from scratch, on merit, with a clarity of vision that made other leaders look like they were improvising. The first thing he understood was that loyalty had to be personal, not abstract, not transactional. Warriors needed to believe that Temüjin saw them, individually, and valued what they brought. He was known to remember names, to acknowledge acts of courage specifically, to reward not just victory but faithfulness. In a world where common soldiers were treated as expendable by noble commanders who barely knew their faces, this was revolutionary. He also made a decision that flew in the face of every tradition the steppe knew. When he defeated an enemy tribe, he didn't simply slaughter the survivors or leave them leaderless. He absorbed them, offered them a place in his growing force with the same terms as everyone else. Prove your loyalty, fight well, and you will rise. Betray me and the consequences will be final, most accepted. Because the alternative was worse, yes, but also because the offer was genuinely attractive. He built a personal guard, the Keshig, an elite unit of warriors sworn directly to his protection. To be selected for the Keshig was an enormous honor, and Temüjin chose its members personally, often elevating men of low birth who had demonstrated exceptional courage or devotion. It sent a message to every warrior on the steppe: your loyalty will be seen and it will be rewarded. He also began to surround himself with gifted commanders, generals who would go on to become legends in their own right, men like Subutai and Jebe, who started as ordinary soldiers and rose, entirely on the basis of their ability, to lead tens of thousands of warriors. Under any other system, they would have lived and died in obscurity. Under Temüjin, they became architects of conquest, tribe by tribe, skirmish by skirmish, victory by victory. The force growing around Temüjin wasn't just an army. It was a new kind of society, one built on competence, loyalty, and a shared belief in the man at its center. And it was precisely that growing belief that made conflict with Jamuka inevitable. The two men had tried for a time to coexist. They had even campaigned together, riding side by side against shared enemies in the early years of Temüjin's rise. But the fault line between their philosophies ran too deep. As warriors began to defect from Jamuka's camp to Temüjin's, drawn by the promise of a system where merit mattered, the tension became personal. This wasn't just political disagreement anymore. It was Temüjin's entire worldview actively dismantling Jamuka's authority, one converted warrior at a time. The breaking point came at the Battle of Dalan Balchut. Jamuka struck first, and he struck hard. His forces outnumbered Temüjin's, and the result was a crushing defeat. Jamuka, in victory, demonstrated exactly the kind of leader he was. He boiled captured enemy commanders alive in large cauldrons, a display of dominance designed to terrorize. It was brutal, and for a moment it looked like Temüjin's rise might end there. But something unexpected happened in the aftermath. Rather than the defeat breaking Temüjin's followers, Jamuka's savagery repelled them. Warriors who had been on the fence made their choice. Tribal leaders who had watched the battle from a distance looked at Jamuka's cruelty and looked at Temüjin's conduct and chose Temüjin. Defeat had made him stronger. It was a pattern that would repeat throughout his life. The war between them stretched across years, back and forth, coalition against coalition. The steppe itself seemed to be deciding which vision of the Mongol world would survive. In the end, it wasn't a single dramatic battle that settled it. It was attrition, political, military, and human. One by one, the allies who had stood with Jamuka drifted away or were defeated. His coalition crumbled, and eventually, Jamuka found himself abandoned, in a bitter echo of what had once happened to Temüjin himself, betrayed by his own followers, who handed him over hoping for reward. When Jamuka was brought before Temüjin, the moment was loaded with everything the two men had been to each other. Temüjin offered mercy. He asked his sworn brother to join him again. Jamuka refused. He said that the sky was only big enough for one sun. There was no place for him in a world ruled by Temüjin. He would rather die. Temüjin granted his wish, but honored him in the way the Mongols reserved for the noble-born, executing him without spilling blood. It was, in its way, a final act of respect between two men who had once been brothers, and it was the last obstacle between Temüjin and total power. The rival was gone. The tribes were fracturing toward him. The steppe, vast, brutal, unconquerable, was bending to the will of one man. But winning the steppe was only the beginning. Because Temüjin understood something that Jamuka never had, that uniting a people wasn't just about defeating enemies. It was about building something that could last, something with structure, with law, with a vision larger than any single man's ambition. He wasn't finished yet, not even close.